Welcome to Invest in Women, the podcast series. Your insight into the growing wealth of women and the issues that impact their business and yours. See what happens when you educate, empower, and invest in women.
Gillian Howell joins us today. Gillian, how are you? Thank you so much for being part of the show.
Thank you very much, Melissa. It's my pleasure.
You know, I have always heard the message that women make a certain amount of money based on a man's dollar, 50 cents on the dollar, 75 cents on the dollar, depending on what race you are, right? I've also heard of widows going bankrupt when their husbands die. So it's this constant subliminal message that women are not associated with wealth. And I was hoping maybe we could talk today about women in wealth and how wealth does apply to women.
We can certainly dispel that, and we can talk about really what's close to my heart is how much they influence philanthropy, how much their influence over the years has been so successful in moving philanthropy along. And I think it's all spectrums of wealth and giving out, you know, whether they contribute their time or their talent or their money, their treasure. Women have become just key opinion leaders and key decision makers. You know, I mean, as you say, like I think it's 57% of the workforce of the American workforce are women. They own about, I think, a third of the private wealth in the world. But that with the transfer of wealth that's going to happen, you know, they say by 2030, that will be women driving more than 2/3 of the wealth. And that's kind of phenomenal. And that, again, can relate back very positively to their influence on philanthropy as well.
And Jillian, I just want to reiterate that point. You had mentioned that it right now about 1/3 of wealth in the world. And then here soon, it will transfer to 2/3 of the wealth of the world will be women. And I mean, because those are the messages I want to hear instead of how far behind we are, right?
No, that we're moving ahead for sure, and I think what women control as well has just increased, even in just the financial household itself, how much they drive just wealth decisions and how much they drive certainly financial decisions. And I think, you know, the world, not just now, but I think they've been waking up for a long time, looking at women as economic agents. I guess the World Bank just, you know, says gender equality is smart economics. I mean, that's just plain and simple, you know. When Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she said women are the cornerstone of foreign policy, and when women are free to vote, and this is all over the world, and run for public office, governments are more effective and responsive to their people. And then when women are free to earn a living and start small businesses, and that again is probably more beyond the US as well, the data is clear, they become key drivers of that economic growth in whatever region that is. And the Economist, this quote has been around for a long time, but they came out with a big statement saying, forget China, forget India, forget the internet. Economic growth is going to be led by women over the next few decades.
And that's incredibly encouraging. I think that when you talk about philanthropy too, and again, Gillian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel, and I've had some friends who have been financially successful, and philanthropy has been one of the main thrusts of that wealth. You know, that's the motivation to be able to give. Do you think it's, you know, I don't want to be stereotypical about women, you know, needing to feel connected to something, because that certainly doesn't mean men don't have to feel connected to something. But I do find in the workforce, a lot of times women are more motivated if they're emotionally satisfied with what they're doing.
Correct. I mean, women are just different than men. That's just a given, right? So they give differently. The Women's Philanthropy Institute at the Center for Philanthropy at the University of Indiana are constantly looking at this topic, and they came up with some very interesting things around demographics. You know, like women across generations. They have shown through data stats are more likely than men to give. And then what's interesting now is what's emerging is younger women are influencing household decisions more than their older counterparts. So there's a kind of a new generation emerging of givers that are actually leading more than their older counterparts did. And then motivation. Women is really giving based on empathy for others. Like that's their primary driver. And then men are often giving more around self-interest. I mean, that's a blanket statement, and we shouldn't. I mean, that's not just for every man, obviously, out there, but that when they looked at all the stats, it can be driven by more self-interest, maybe for tax reasons more than maybe altruistic.
Well, and again, I don't think you're being unfair. I think there's a pattern there. It's like with anything, it happens enough to where there's a pattern of men and self-interest being the motivator. I was just thinking that when, we did talk about success and networking, that I could see where women could, in these positions, for mentorship and for networking within philanthropic efforts, right? That's how they would probably get to know each other and start working together on some of these initiatives.
Well, that's actually a very good point. And they looked at behavior. So how do women and men give? Which platforms and approaches do they use when it comes to philanthropy? And women like to give collectively. I'd like to talk a little bit about that too.
Absolutely. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, it's like 70% of giving circles, we'll say, people coming together to look collectively at what they want to do are majority women. And it is becoming just a significant trend in the proliferation of women's networks, funds, giving circles. And in some cases, many institutions are responding to that, and organizations, they create specific initiatives to engage female donors and looking them together. You see a lot of community foundations doing that today, and getting women collectively, because women love to come together to discuss it, to pool their resources, which of course makes total sense, to collaborate on ideas as well. So, and you see that a lot in the high net worth women, especially. High net worth. The Bank of America has done a high net worth study for years, started in 2006, actually, I think, study of high net worth philanthropy. And 90% of high net worth people give. And so that's kind of a message out there. Majority of those, majority are women, but there's a lot of men in there as well, mostly, and women just lead by a few percentage, but men are giving as well. 90% of them. And I think that's a huge message for the financial advisor, right?
Absolutely.
Because, not only are your clients all giving, the women donors are having a conversation with them about their giving. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, then there was another study done again back in my old days when I was at Bank of America, and we worked with the Philanthropic Institute on it. We did it twice, 2008 and 2013, and I don't think it's changed since. And it was a study of an advisor perception of that conversation with the client and the client's perception. And the advisor, when asked, do you have a philanthropic conversation with your clients? The answer was, oh, absolutely. We talk about philanthropy all the time. Well, come to find out, 99% of those conversations were all tax driven. So this is what you should do, and this is what you should say. You can save by doing X in whatever wealth strategy they come up with. When you ask the clients, they were like, no, we don't talk about, well, we talk about taxes, but that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about my values, how to instill those values in my kids, my legacy, how am I going to actually be successful in my philanthropy? That's what I want to talk about. But unfortunately, mostly my advisors aren't having. So there's a huge disconnect there. Yeah. And I think it's a big learning. We used to talk to advisors an awful lot about that learning, about how to have a meaningful conversation. And I understand too that sometimes those conversations can be perceived as very personal, a little private. You're talking about values. You're talking about, what's meaningful to them, their hearts, their passions. But the fact is, if you're not having those conversations, your client is likely having them somewhere else.
Well, and it makes sense, Gillian, because if you think about it, so many people are emotional with their money anyway, because we're so defined by how much we make, what we do for a living. It's usually the first thing you ask somebody instead of, what's your philanthropic, passion. Usually people say, well, what do you do for a living, And so I think for a lot of people, naturally, they are emotional, whether it's positive or negative about their money. And so absolutely, it would make sense, because it's so funny, Jillian, you say this. I was thinking of institutions that know this well, and it's usually universities. The university I went to had that conversation with me a long time ago. If if we served you and you're passionate about this university, then we would love to be part of your philanthropic efforts, right? So same with advisors. I could see what you're saying, but it behooves them to make sure that you tap into the positive aspects of money. And for a lot of people, that is to be able to make a difference somewhere.
Totally. And obviously it behooves them to have sometimes I'm hoping these days are becoming less and less, but like there are some advisors who always lead with conversations with what they call the patriarch of the family, and they're missing out on something major because the spouse can in many cases be leading the family in terms of financial assets, but certainly influence them. And then that statistic that I gave you that in 2030 they're going to with the intertransfer of wealth, they could actually be real wealth owners, that you need to include them in all decision making and discussions, not just about philanthropy, but about everything else. I mean, I think it's just a given, but you'd be surprised.
You know what? I'm not because, Gillian, personally, I'm a single mom of a son, and I find it interesting that when people see that there's a Mr. Carter at the residence, even though he's 9 years old, I make a joke that's what I call him to my friends. Well, he's Mr. Carter because for a lot of people, that 9-year-old is more important to them than the mama is. And so I don't know if it's just muscle memory. Unfortunately, it's like we're having to dig out of these stereotypes and these long standing training of people to think that way. But you're right. I mean, especially the statistic you gave earlier, that's why I didn't want to over or understate it, rather, that the fact that women are getting wealthier and in more control of things, and so advisors should follow suit in knowing how important they are.
The trajectory is there for absolute sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing I think it's really important too, what women, the audience of women here, even women financial advisors as well, is that another powerful way that they can influence philanthropy is by actually giving to women and girls. And it's an interesting kind of area because you can give to women and girls regardless almost of your strategy. If you think about if you're interested in education, if you're interested in the environment, if you're very think about social issues, you can influence all that by still giving to women and girls. And there's just so much research that the most effective way to change the world is by investing in women and girls. So it's just looking at it from another angle and improving the life of a female. Research shows that creates benefit and opportunity for the extended family, and that the future generations, even and the larger community in which we live in. So I think if you look globally, like women are more often disproportionately, unfortunately impacted by the issue of the world, including, poverty, healthcare, sex trafficking, all of those horrible things. But also that violence against women is, global pandemic. But if we support women and girls, we can turn those indicators around. And there's really a ton of research and a ton of effort around that now. United Nations, World Bank, international aid organizations, that even the largest private foundations that are out there now are there's a consensus that empowering women to realize their full potential can break that cycle of poverty. And that healthy, educated, and empowered women have healthy, educated, and competent daughters and sons. It just makes sense, So
well, and it goes, and not to step on you, but I mean, it goes into what I said earlier about muscle memory and just understanding that educating not only yourself, educating advisors, but I would love your opinion, briefly about when an advisor's talking with their family. A lot of times that patriarchal idea of passing on information of investing and money to your son.
Right.
And it seems like there's no conversations with daughters about those very same things. So I was hoping to get your opinion on that, how it could start from at home, right?
It absolutely can. It's another gap, I guess. I mean, hopefully the advisors are kind of tuning into that, but I think more and more families are too. I mean, there's so many women going into finance themselves, and it's just influencing financial decisions, that it's just a kind of a given. So yes, I think like as a patriarch of a family, you can learn by that. But I think the tables are turning a little bit on that. And I think from a financial advisor perspective, there are no more traditional roles. I think those things have been a little, quite broken, those molds, I guess. And
I think you're right too, because, we've had some great guests on, this show, and a lot of them said that they haven't really had a difficult path being in the financial world. Like, they've been encouraged and they've been, promoted, and they've, they haven't had the struggles that other generations have had just to have their voice heard, right?
Think it's true. I really think it's true. And it's especially, I mean, in the US. I mean, I think the world in general probably has a lot to learn as we go global and all that. But I think in the US, I think it has. I think the molds have changed in that. I mean, I see so many people like because I've been in the financial industry my whole career, and I'm now with foundation sources. We're not asset managers, but I was with Bank of America, and um, you see it all the time in graduates, and women are just emerging and growing and getting opportunities in the financial space just as
Mm-hmm.
much as their male counterparts are.
Well, and I love though that, your focus is on philanthropy, because again, I have a friend who that's her mantra. She started a foundation in which she helps women make money for the purpose of being able to give it, because I think that was her way to kind of motivate women to learn or be ambitious with money in a different way, right? Because they could give. And so it is important to have those conversations, because I mean, for advisors, they could lead with that conversation with a lot of women, and they'd get someone to open up a lot faster than if you led with something else.
They absolutely would. And if they're, and financial advisors themselves are passionate about philanthropy, you know what I mean, in their own worlds, in their own,
Right.
just sharing that kind of commonality or a kind of passion around it is perfectly appropriate, and they shouldn't shy from it. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
kind of what is expected, I think.
Well, now, Jillian, I got to ask you, what, is there a story in your life that caused you to focus on this part of the financial world? Because you're so learned on it and so passionate about it yourself.
Well, I've been in the business 33 years, so it's kind of it's hard not to be at this point, I guess. My mother, my family, I came from Ireland, so I immigrated to the States when I was 24. Chernobyl and all those dreadful things that had happened. She used to take kids in, um, and over the summer, and just they'd live with us for a certain period of time and just give them tons of fruit and all of that. So I suppose I learned at the kitchen table a bit myself, but I certainly didn't think this was going to be my career. But it has been a journey and a true pleasure, I have to say, because you ultimately are working with all day, every day, with people who are giving their money away. They want to do it right. They want your help. They want to have impact. They want to engage their kids, and all of those areas we can help with Foundation Source. It's a great job. It's a great
Well,
job.
well, Jane, before we let you go, I would love to know your advice for women who hear this and say, wait a second, financial advisors or clients who hear this and say, wait a second, you know what? I never thought of that, right? I never thought of focusing on that. What would you tell them and how they can start today?
Well, I think the financial advisors, if they're not doing it today, if they're not having a conversation with their clients around their values and their passions, their legacy, what they want to achieve in the world, how they want to change the world, they ought to really quickly have those conversations, because there is an expectation. And there's no doubt that if 90% of their clients are giving, practically every one of their clients are doing it. And they're just really waiting for that conversation. We understand that they're having the tax conversation, but you have to go beyond it. And these, of course, once you do that, your relationships become so stickier, because you're really truly developing a deep relationship with your client beyond the kind of financial implications of that
Right.
relationship. So,
Well, and if you're a client, you should push your advisor on that, right? You should lead with that and then see how your advisor handles that. And then maybe that's a indication of that relationship.
exactly. You
Mm-hmm.
need to step up and say it, because a lot of those financial advisors have access to subject matter experts, and that's something I should have said earlier, Alyssa, is that don't shy away from it because you don't have the expertise yourself, because no client expects the financial advisor to be subject matter expert in how to fulfill on their passions or their values or their legacy. They know that they expect it, that they're going to bring somebody in that has that kind of talent, that focuses on what's the right vehicle to go into, like how would that vehicle run, how can we help you start it. Like, that's the expectation, is that the financial advisor is that gatekeeper.
Mm-hmm.
And that's perfectly fine, you know.
Gillian, you had mentioned earlier about how Foundation Source is a resource for advisors. So talk a little bit about that and how they can reach out to you.
Sure. I mean, we work with advisors. We work with a lot of advisors right now. We work directly with clients, but advisors can. Foundation Source is a one-stop shop for everything a private foundation would need, including starting that foundation from its actual, filing all the tax forms and getting that foundation set up. So if your client is any way interested in a foundation, Foundation Source is that place. All aspects of compliance and legal. We do all of the tax returns. We do all of the administration. We take all of the burden of running a foundation, literally every aspect on, to kind of free their client up for the joy of giving, basically. And we can be that partner with the financial advisor. And we don't manage assets, which I think is often can be a tough match. But because we don't, we're just in the business of helping run foundations.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Gillian, website where they can go to find out more?
Yep, Foundation Source has its own website out there. You can just plug it in and it's right there, www.foundationsource.com. It's out there.
I love it. Well, now you're inspiring me now I want to start something. Gillian Howell.
Time, talent, and treasure. You don't have to always give money. So that's another thing.
There you go. I love it. Gillian Howell, thank you so much for being a part of the show. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Invest in Women, the podcast series. Your insight into the growing wealth of women and how to attract and retain your female clients and help scale your practice. Learn more by subscribing to this podcast or visiting fa-mag.com.